the idea that we need experience, the idea that we need to be able to kind of have like thousands of dollars to run for office and stuff. And so I thought that I would bring a few folks on here that did it, right, and did it in a way where they didn't have the infrastructure that exists in places like New York City to be able to run. So I think for the sake of being able to kind of make things go quick, who here is most pressed for time? John, Ben, and Giancarlo, because I know Giancarlo's outside right now. Is anybody?
I'm not pressed for time. I'm good, man.
Okay. Ben, do you want to go first because you're the youngest?
Sure. And before I get started, I'll just say I see you made a little jab about villages being small, that 32 votes would constitute 2 villages. First, I'd just say that that's not the case with Johnson City, which is the 3rd largest upstate village. But just getting that out of the way, I wanted to make sure that people knew that all villages are not that small. Although I do enjoy your municipal humor. My name is Ben Reynolds. I'm on the village board in Johnson City, and I was first elected at the age of 18. I had announced my campaign just before graduating high school because I was reached out to by some folks to see if I could help recruit candidates. My grandfather had previously run for the same post, and I'm sure that they thought that maybe he would know people. And I decided that instead I would say, well, why don't I run? And it took a little convincing, a little bit of back and forth with the party. But eventually I came home from what was actually my senior trip to Virginia Beach, and my petitions were printed and I was set to go. So I would say that my start was really getting involved with the March for Our Lives in New York, and I led that movement in Broome County and Binghamton specifically. But then got involved really on the ground, getting to know people. And luckily that year I had the opportunity to knock on many doors to really find out the issues facing my community beyond what I had known from growing up there for 18 years, which is quite short, I guess, when you think of the time that you're actually conscious of the issues that are surrounding you. But that was quite tough for candidates this year to get out and really meet voters. I mean, I'm not really sure what you had in mind, Paolo, but I'd be happy to take questions or elaborate on anything if you wanted me to.
I think the one thing that we'd like you to talk about is how difficult was it for you to run versus how difficult, folks told you that it was going to be. And if you could kind of shed some light about how much more simpler the process is than people think.
There was certainly a disparity between my first campaign and the second campaign. I could definitely tell you that as an incumbent, it was much easier to raise money and get support from local businesses and things like that than it was as a challenger, regardless of party affiliation. And in the beginning, of course, when I had first ran, I'm sure there was little faith among many of the established people within the local party or organizing or anything like that. And it was tough. I mean, like I said, I was lucky that year I was able to knock on doors. I'm not quite sure how a new candidate would have done this year. We didn't have many first-time candidates. I mean, one of our Broome County legislature flips this year was a woman who had run twice. So we know that the running twice thing definitely helps. But yeah, I mean, I raised $1,000 my first campaign, and this year I raised 11, despite the pandemic. So I would definitely say that, being established is certainly helpful. The first time I only did literature. I didn't do much online or in the newspaper. And I did get some free media coverage just because of being so young. But of course, this time I had a lot more knowledge about campaigning, a lot more of a infrastructure of people that were really invested in my race and things like that. So the dynamic was quite different. I would say if it was as hard as people made it out to be campaigning, I didn't think I had a shot in the dark the first campaign. I did not expect to win at all. And I ended up winning only by 29 votes after all of the votes were counted. This year, a little bit different the situation. I came in first place on top of the Republican candidate by over 200 votes. So I performed much better this year, and I'm proud of that. So yeah, definitely a lot easier this time than the last time, despite the pandemic too.
Ben, if I'm correct, you're the only Democratic elected official on your village board, correct?
I am the only Democrat elected in the village of Johnson City. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess the only other thing that I would ask you to shed light on is, do you feel like it's easy for young people to run for office at this moment? And not easy, but is it, do you feel like conversations like this make it easier for folks to run for office? Because I feel like, one of the reasons we started these kind of series is to kind of make sure that folks aren't scared off from running for office because it might seem difficult,
So I'll be honest. If Trump had won re-election, I think it was going to be a really tough 2 years. Even just for my term on the board, I think the whole dynamic surrounding politics under a Trump presidency had been totally different than before. And I'm really optimistic that these next 4 years will have a totally different atmosphere around politics. Maybe, not so exciting, I guess. But I would say that for young people who are looking to get involved, certainly find some core people that are interested in helping you out. And it shouldn't be something to be intimidated about. I mean, there are certainly things to do that can be difficult, like raising money. But I think if you have some people that are really dedicated to helping you out, then as long as you set forward with a game plan and really execute it, which is really the important thing, because I've talked to many candidates that come up with a plan. They're like, oh, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to call these 10 people for money or whatever. And they just don't do it, either because they're scared or they're nervous or whatever it may be. But to that, I would say, just do it. I mean, there are people out there that'll give you money just because you're fighting for a progressive cause. There are people out there that'll give you money just because you're young or because they want a stake in local government, whatever it may be. So I would say that there are definitely the resources out there to get young folks started. And of course, I'd be more than happy to talk to anybody that's interested.
Great. Thank you, Ben. I know, just to kind of move us along, I know that Eric Ball we've been joined by Eric Ball, who's a village trustee in Walton. And he's pulled over to the side of the road because he's driving right now to kind of be part of this panel. So I hope if it's okay that we let him go next. Hi, Eric, are you there?
I'm here, and I'm actually out of my car, but I'm pit stop. So
please, like my friend Eric, we met 2 years ago. We had assisted him in making sure that some calls could be made for his village, and he won. And he won in a village that I think is pretty swingish, if not Republican leaning. So Eric, if you could please talk a little bit about your race.
Absolutely. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm happy to join you. So just a brief background. I first ran coming up this March. It'll be 2 years that I've been in office. So, I started off, with an interest to run by picking up the newspaper, and or paying attention to what was going on in my town and in the press. And just like, man, I really want to get in there and get my voice heard and try to elevate other voices. So I was really sort of inspired to try to get involved. I didn't know the first thing about running a campaign. I linked up with Paolo, and by his help and others, they were able to make phone banking efforts, which were very helpful. My top donation, in fact, my only donation, was $100 because I didn't even solicit money. I was just like, I'm going to run, I'm going to do my best, and let's see what happens here. And we had our signature drives and was able to accomplish that easily. I'm not sure how that's going to work with I'll be up for re-election this next March, so I'll have to figure out the safest way to get petitions. But I was able to do that and had my first meet the candidates night. And that's really when we all got to speak our mind on the issues and, introduce myself to would-be voters. So it was an excellent experience, and I didn't expect to win, as Ben echoed, or as Ben said before. And I ended up defeating almost a 10-year incumbent by about probably a similar margin, 20 to 30 votes. So when I was in the clerk's office and she read off the numbers and she said, well, Eric Ball wins the seat. I'm like, all right, let's check the numbers again.
Recount.
But I was thrilled. I was thrilled about that. And beyond that, just speaking to my general experience on the board, I was assigned Department of Public Works Committee, as well as zoning committee. And being a younger person and interfacing with department heads who are more than half my age, it was a little intimidating at first, but ended up being able to develop a cordial, professional relationship with these department heads. We have mutual respect. It's something we work towards. It's quite a growing experience being put in that position. But yeah, I love every minute of it. I love being involved. I love trying to solve problems, and even working with people that I don't agree politically, who are solid Trump supporters. We're able to find the common ground to work towards a common purpose, which is to make our community a better place. So it's been a growing experience as well, even though that I might have differences with some others. But so that's a nutshell of 2 years. I don't know if you have any questions.
I guess, Eric, just to kind of start a conversation off with you, and we can take questions afterwards, is how did you feel? Did you feel like there were any barriers on our side to running for office, as like a young person, as a young, diverse person running for office on the Democratic Party ticket?
No, I would say most of the barriers, so in Ben's position, his village board, so I guess that's more explicitly a partisan race. Correct me if I'm wrong. But my village election isn't explicitly partisan. So, I didn't have those types of barriers right in the way. Those types of frictions came to light later on, but I didn't find any barriers about that up front.
Great. And do you, Eric, I guess the only other question that I have for you is, do you feel like there's a network in place to be able to assist young folks to run for office, specifically in rural counties?
No, I think that's something we're severely lacking. I think we need to, there's such an age gap in these village governments. They're run, in the most part by people later in age, later in years, and it's not only important for young people to run for office, it's important for the communities that there is an exchange of learning how to run a community, because one way or the other, young people are going to be in charge one day. So no, I think there definitely needs to be more robust recruitment effort for young people in rural areas to run. I think that it's absolutely important.
Great. Thank you, Eric. And I think that brings me next to Dutchess County legislator Giancarlo Yaverias, a personal friend of mine. We both served on the board of New York State Young Democrats. And, he's got an interesting story because I think you're also a youth and a faith leader, right, Giancarlo? Correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Giancarlo kind of comes from a perspective of bringing those perspectives into county government. And, it's an interesting place because, in Dutchess County, unlike a lot of counties in upstate, they do have somewhat of an infrastructure. And they do have somewhat of an organizing capacity there for the Democratic Party. It's just that sometimes those organizations are not conducive to folks of color, right, Giancarlo? And so I invited him to come and speak because, as a person of color, he's also a person of color. We've talked about facing barriers in our county Democratic parties and within the infrastructure of the Democratic Party, and sometimes we get into good trouble, and that trouble doesn't always look great, but it's worth fighting for. So Giancarlo, please take it away.
Yeah, so peace and blessings to everybody on this call. Paolo, thank you for having me here. Shout out to Benjamin. What's up, man? It's been a long time since I've seen you. So like Paolo said, my name is Giancarlo Various, county legislator for the District 1 town of Poughkeepsie. I call myself the prettiest legislator in Dutchess County. That's kind of my slogan. I got involved in advocacy at a kind of a young age, at 16, 17. Helping young kids and mentoring young kids. Prior to politics, I was a football player. So I played in high school, I played in college, had my chances to go to the NFL. And then I got hurt. The NFL dream was over at that point. And then I got sick. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and I was paralyzed from the waist down. And so that brought me back to Dutchess County. At the time, I was in Long Island. And I decided to scroll on Facebook, and I saw an internship opening for Terry Gibson. So I said, oh well, I might as well do something since I'm not doing anything. And so I got involved with the Terry Gibson campaign as an intern. Within that same time, I lost a lot of friends to drugs and violence. I lost from 2011 to 2016. I lost 35 of my friends to drugs and violence. And being that young kid that came from the hood, and for many of us who lived in my area, people dying was a normal thing. But for me, it became too consistent. There were too many people in my area dying, and nobody really caring about it. Nobody really asking the questions of what are elected officials doing for people of color that are dying in this way, young people that are dying in this way. So I got involved with the Terry Gibson campaign. From there, I realized that it wasn't that partially, one, they didn't care, but two, they also didn't know about it because it wasn't their experience. They didn't live in my area. They didn't go to school in my area. They don't have kids in the area. And so I decided to run out of a whim. Prior to getting into office, I wasn't a person that voted regularly. I wasn't a person that really cared about the politics because it didn't interest me. But it got to the point where so many people of my community were passing away, and so many people in my area were trying to find answers to why this is happening and why don't we have a youth center? Why don't we have a trade school? And so I thought that I was pretty enough and had the skills enough to run for office. And I did so. I did so really without knowing anything. Some of the hardships that I went through with politics was imagery. Uh, Before they accepted it, my local party here wanted me to cut my hair. As you can tell, I have pretty long hair. They wanted me to cut my hair and shave my beard in order to create this image of what a politician looks like. And for me, my hair and my beard is part of my culture. And for me, it was like, well, what do you mean? What is a politician supposed to look like? What does that mean? Are they not supposed to look like me? And once my party realized that I wasn't going to change my ways simply just to fit their agenda, that if I was going to lose an election, that I was going to lose with my integrity, and and not win because I decided to change. I wanted to truthfully and wholly represent my constituents who don't look like who are cookie cutter guys who wear suits and ties. Some of us can't afford the suits and ties. We wear sneakers with our suits, right? And so I wanted to make sure that if I was going to run for office, and if people were going to see me, they were going to see a person from their area, from their hood, who understood what they were dealing with and where they come from. And so for me, my first time running, I only raised $132 when they told me I needed to raise about 10,000. And the reason why I didn't go hard in raising money is because one, I know my community and my core constituents don't have that kind of money, right? They're worried about other things. But I also thought it was like, I don't think money matters more than connecting with people. I don't think money matters more than interacting with my constituents, them seeing my face and being able to connect with me. Sure, they can see you on the mailer, but it's completely different when they see you at their local deli or they see you at the local grocery store and they can really talk to you, they can really approach you, where they call you and they're not getting some assistance, but they're getting you in person. And so I did that. I did that for the time of my campaign where I just knocked on doors. I called people. I did meet the candidates with other people as well, so that people knew who I was, even though people knew who I was. And I think what helped me win by a pretty big majority the first time was that I was a person from the community where I looked like them, I spoke like them, I had, I'm rough around the edges like them. I don't necessarily always talk proper. I have a certain twang to me, and because of because of that, people believed in me. People were able to vote for me, and from that point on in District One, I became the first person of color in my seat since the inception of the Dutchess County Legislature. And so it took them 60 plus years to get somebody like me in there. But that just speaks to, uh, the faction that's there. And, I've been blessed to be able to represent the people since then. I've been able to bring to the forefront the core issues that plague Black and Brown people that white folks don't know about. We as people of color have something that's called Black people problem. And that's a real thing. That's not just a saying, that's not just a caption. It's a real thing. And poor whites as well go through the same things who live in our area. Trouble with housing, trouble with when it comes to food stamps and dealing with DSS, trouble with having proper youth programming for our young kids in my area that's 5 miles long. There is no youth center there. They don't have a place for kids to go. And there's not enough funding for the nonprofit programs that are there. But we do have a $200 million jail being built. So that goes to let you know where their money is going to. Even currently now that we're looking at a budget where out of $1, 3 cents of that goes to education, and 1 cent of that goes to youth programming, and the rest of that goes to law enforcement. So it lets you know how my county is working and what they're shifting to and what they do. Hardships that I went through, my area in the town of Poughkeepsie is what they call a bed community. So many people work in the city and just come up to my area just to sleep. But it is a very segregated community as well. Instead of calling ourselves the town of Poughkeepsie, we call ourselves the town of Arlington, simply to not be associated with the city of Poughkeepsie. And that was one type of racism and segregation that's there. During my first campaign, my challenger would knock on doors and tell her constituents that you don't want the brown boy in the legislature. He's someone who talks with a certain twang and could never sound educated. Before she realized that I had a master's degree and I graduated from Harvard. And so certainly there was racism in my campaign, but persevered through that and obviously won. Issues with my party simply, I think now, I think it was because they weren't ready for the change at that point in time. They wanted to match up with the Republicans, but that was to their demise every time. And I think the reason that I won was because I was completely different, because I didn't match up with what a politician looks like, what a Democratic politician looks like, or what a person of color in politics looks like. There are very few politicians who look like me, right? Who have long hair, who have a rugged beard, and who talk in a certain way that I speak. it's very rare to find, but it's also something very, very necessary. And so now my local party has grown to love me and certainly have grown to support me. But I always stays the grassroots, always stays the grassroots because that's where it's important. I think people is always going to be more important than money. So I won with $132. My last campaign that I run for re-election, I ran with no money. I ran with no money whatsoever, no money raised, no funds raised. Simply just speaking to people and listening to their concerns and acting on those concerns.
Great. Thank you, Giancarlo. I guess the one question that I have for you is a lot of folks, a lot of folks in the left, we're talking about anti-racism work, right? And the work that we do to make sure that we can dismantle racism. And it's something that's crucial across upstate New York, from Dutchess County all the way up to St. Lawrence, right? And in Shenango County too. Do you consider folks, younger folks of color running as part of that anti-racism work?
Absolutely. I think we need more young people of color to run, especially young women of color. We need more women of color in elected office. I really think that's like, Paolo and I, you spoke about this and we spoke about it. That's a blind spot here in rural areas like Dutchess County. You need more women of color. We need more young people of color to run. I think a part of that is, part of that kind of falls on me as a person of color who is an elected official to, go out there and kind of, find the next, city council person or the next county legislator and kind of groom them, right? Taking their strength and showing them that you can certainly be in office no matter what your past is. I certainly have a rugged past, and I'm still in office, and I'm still here, pursuing the greater good. And I think for young people of color who want the chance to run, can certainly run. All they really need is just proper support.
Thank you, Giancarlo. I think that you kind of gave a really good argument about, women of color running. And, I had messaged John and Giancarlo, and I would have been asking if they knew any women of color that were elected officials in upstate. And we could, I think the person we could find is an essential worker right now in the town of Manlius in Onondaga County, and couldn't join us tonight. But, that goes to show that, the conversations that we want to have to, defeat Republicans start within the party, right? And in dismantling these like arguments of racism and honestly classism and ageism that exists within the Democratic Party and in some structures of our Democratic committees. So I wanted to kind of turn over the the baton to John Shoemaker, who's a councilman in the town of Saugerties. I met John and during the struggle for in the protests for George Floyd. And we bonded over the fact that, there were a lot of Democratic elected officials who thought it was too radical to condemn the murder of George Floyd. And we were introduced in that context. So, John's a councilman in the town of Saugerties, and I think this is your first term, correct, John?
We have 4-year terms here, and in the middle of this term, I actually also ran for county legislature in 2019.
Oh, wow. So John, please take it away.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just start with, kind of what got me into this and where I started from. So it's like shortly before, like during the 2016 primary, actually, I had been, honestly, I was very apolitical. I studied biology in college. I didn't really think it, I was that typical, it didn't matter there's no point in it. The system's broken. And then for me, Bernie Sanders ended up kind of being someone who like enlightened me in how there is, it's going to remain broken and it's never going to be fixed if you stay outside of it and you don't get involved with it. So I kind of started, I got a little bit involved locally by speaking up against the pipeline, the Pilgrim pipeline that they were trying to build up along the New York State Thruway, which would have ran right through Saugerties, and kind of doing the research on that and getting up in front of a town board. I realized that like, we get inundated with these ideas of national politics being the, end all be all, when really it starts down in your backyard. And so after I had done that, I actually, as soon as I got up and spoke, I guess the local Democratic Party were shocked that there was a young person getting up there and speaking, because all of a sudden I had our chair and one of the county legislators from Saugerties coming up to me and asking me to join the meetings. And they were kind of surprised to find out at the time I wasn't actually a registered Democrat, because at the time I didn't want to be one, but then quickly learned how it's actually really important to be involved with the party, because like I said, you're not going to really enact the change. And the funny thing is, I actually had a similar issue back then as John Carlos, in that I had much longer hair, and this was in 2015, and a very scraggly beard. And I was told that like, if they didn't want me to run that time because internal politics had played the way it was, and there wasn't a spot. But they were like, if you were going to run, I had to cut my hair and shave. And I was like, that was again like a big no for me. And so when I ran in 2017, I actually had gotten rid of the beard just because I wanted to already before that, but I still had the long hair, and there was still a little bit pressure. But I didn't probably get as much pressure because there, as we were talking about, racism being built into it, I probably got a little bit more of a pass there. But so for me, it was a little different in terms of running for it, because a lot of people, it sounds like, went through a primary process. At the time, the Sardis Democratic Committee, actually, we went through a caucus. So the process for that leading up to it was, I ended up getting a phone call from someone saying that they were looking for someone. They thought I'd be a good fit. They thought it would be a good time, with what happened in 2016, to get some young person involved in Sardis. And so I went through a process where we interviewed with a selection committee of our local party. And that's where I kind of, I guess, might have, and I think a lot of people would normally hit this barrier, where in that meeting, they were asking me, the big question was, what was my war chest? And I was like, I had just come off of working on Zephyr Teachup's campaign as a field manager. I was working night shifts at Bread Alone, essentially. I didn't have the job I had right now. So I was like, well, you guys have my resume. Bread packer at Bread Alone does not have a war chest. And, they're asking about my parents and family. I'm like, there's not much, isn't money there. I mean, I was called up, asked to come in and interview. It's like, that's not how I intend to win this. And that actually ended up playing a factor in their decision of, not choosing to endorse me as our local committee. But the key thing is that you just kind of had to keep going. I decided, I wanted to be involved. And so I was like, well, since it's a caucus, as long as you don't even need to be a registered Democrat. You just actually had to have a first and a second lined up. So I got a high school friend of mine who had graduated with me, and my friend who had called me. They both gave me a first and second. And the funny thing is the day before that caucus, I actually got a phone call from our chairman saying that their endorsed candidate decided to drop out because she just didn't want to do it. And all of a sudden, the day before I'm being given, they're endorsing me. And I'm just like, wait, you picked, and I think that's where maybe some of the ageism might have came in effect there, because I'm coming in, even though I grew up in Sardis, didn't really have a resume of being that involved with the community yet, because I was still fresh out of college, finding myself. And the woman I was up against that they had chosen was, is still a sitting village board member. It had been involved with a lot of the community. So they probably were like, oh, like she had the credentials in their mind, and they probably thought she had the money and all that comes with it. From what I learned, is what really matters is if you have the drive, and if you're just authentic with it. I got up there and I didn't change anything about myself. I spoke to a room of almost essentially strangers, being like, and had to convince this room of people to, vote for me and choose me to be their candidate. And so obviously I ended up managing to win that. There were 2 seats open. There were, I think, 4 of us that were running. I came in at second there. And that's where, I think Paolo was talking about, or someone had mentioned it earlier about finding, like, sometimes just finding someone in the community that's really going to help you out. And in this case, she will not say that it was part, because of her, but, a lot of the reason I won is because there's a local business owner and a She owns a great bakery. If you're ever in Sardis, go check out Hudson Valley Dessert Company. It's one of the best, I'd say the best bakery in Ulster County, but of course I'm going to be biased on that. But I met her and her husband that night, and they essentially adopted me almost. They wanted to see a young progressive get elected. They wanted to, help out, and they felt that this was a way to do it. And this is something I learned and was a really big lesson during that campaign. I didn't really fundraise too much. They helped out in terms of holding events for me. I did a lot of meet and greets where I didn't believe in charging for them. I thought that kind of cut people out. I wanted anyone to come in and be able to come and talk to me and not be like, oh, a $20 ticket for a mediocre meal, like, which a lot of these fundraisers end up being, you know. And so I think it went really well. I had one of the most heart-touching moments from that is I had a woman coming in with her, I think 5 or 6 year old child, and you know, we were talking, and then all of a sudden they left. He came back with his change jar and was like, I want to give this to you, and like that really meant a lot, because I think to him that showed that, like, it's not just a game for old people, or no offense to the older people here, of course, but you know, there's this perception that you know, it's, you have to wait until you've built a resume, you have to wait until, and you got to keep waiting and waiting, and you know, at a certain point we just have to decide to reach out and grab it. And so it was a very bare bones campaign, and unfortunately at the time the Ulster County Democrats weren't as involved in the local races as they were. I had to struggle, and they didn't even help me with finding a treasurer that I would need until my friend who seconded me stepped up, and he said, you know what, you need it. And he's been my treasurer to this day. And that's, I think, a key there is finding other young people to bring along with you and bring and rise up together. Because after that time of him joining me on my treasury, he's now on our ZBA. He's a library board trustee, and he's likely going to be running to run for town board this next cycle as well. So I think that's a key thing that when we run, we need, like, it shows that it can be done. And I think that's the biggest obstacle for some people looking at it. You know, there's it's the money, it helps, but the funny thing is, my county legislative race, I raised probably $2 to $3 grand for that, and I ended up losing that race. There was a lot of weird things going on, but the one where I raised the most, I ended up not winning. And I think that, you know, that goes to show, and I think we kind of saw that in this cycle. While we won the presidency, we didn't do so well down ballot, despite the fact that we out fundraised. And I think the key to that is, you know, you need to put up candidates that people can believe in and they can connect with. You want to, when you're out there knocking a door, they don't want to, you know, I don't think I've ever actually worn a suit for any of my stuff, you know. And I think that kind of, you know, connects with people, because it makes them realize that you're not some stuffy figure behind a desk or a screen. Like, I'm often, like, not many people might see it, but I walk around in a tie-dye shirt or sweatshirt almost all the time in the village, which some people would be like, oh, you're on the town board, what are you doing? It's like, well, I'm being myself. And that's what I tell a lot of people. I know Betsy Kratt, who had ran for assembly district, or my assembly district, you know, she was recruited because no one wanted to do it. And she was, you know, had asked for a little bit of what to do. And that's why I told her, just be yourself. You know, that's what people, they're going to know if you're being fake. They're going to know if you're not being authentic. And I think that's a big key in this. And then the other aspect of it is just going out and starting it yourself. You know, I know Paolo was saying, you know, and I think someone had mentioned there wasn't infrastructure for young people to run. But when I ran for town board, the Ulster County Young Dems were non-existent. People came by to them and asked them, hey, can you do a little quick endorsement so I can have that little logo on it? And now, you know, me, a few friends, we've gotten together and we've now revitalized that, where it's a core group of 10. One of them was a former our county treasurer for the party. There's a village board member. We've got a couple who are looking to run for county ledge and village and town board seats. And because it was just not there, we just decided, well, we'll have to make it, because it's not going to be done for us. And I think that's a big key when we're looking at, you know, how to really get more people involved. Because when you got a group together to work with, like now that I have this group, it's great because you have friends that you can bounce off of, you can commiserate with, and you can kind of talk about the shared issues that you guys are facing. And it makes it easier, because now I know when, you know, my next race, I'm going to have a whole group of friends and a network that, you know, I made myself, and I didn't have to sit and rely upon party politics or something to come along. Because, you know, the way the party sometimes works, if they think there's a better option, they're going to expect you to step aside. And sometimes that's not what you should do. That actually almost was what happened to me when I ran for county ledge. They were asking me to not run. They thought that, oh, I should stay at the town board. There was another candidate. And I thought that the candidate that they had was deeply flawed. You know, there were a lot of issues with him. And I think that's, you know, one of those times where you just have to be ready to make that good trouble that we like to talk about. And I'm trying to think. think that's kind of, well, I guess, no, it's something that maybe not been touched on so much is that once you're in I think the hardest part is probably getting into the office. Once you're in it, it's not as hard to understand as I think some people might think. You know, in Saugerties, we have a $13 million budget. And some people might think that that's intimidating. And at first it might be, but New York State actually provides a great program when you first get elected that you're able to go up to participate in, and kind of walks you through a little bit, and you're able to make a lot of connections across the state up there. And across, it's not just one side or the other, it's across party lines. You know, it's all for all new elected officials at the local level. You have association of towns where, if your town's a member, you're able to always reach out to them. They have lawyers, they have advisors there that can always help you if you're not sure where to go. And it's really just putting in the hard work and wanting to do it, I think is the key, you know, because it's not very complicated. I think it's simpler than it is. And I know I've really enjoyed it. Maybe it might be different for others, but I've been blessed with a good team to work with on my town board. And I think it's just a matter of just jumping in. It's going to be nervous no matter what. It's going to be intimidating, but there's nothing that beats going out there, running on something you believe in. And if first few times it's going to feel weird when you're knocking on that door for yourself. I know sometimes it's still a little like you're selling yourself, and at least for me, I was always used to doing it for other people. But nothing beats getting out there, talking to the community, getting to know what their needs are, and helping address them. And I found that there's a hunger for people, for many out there, to see us start taking these reins. That was my big concern when I first ran, was, oh, I've got no resume. I'm this young guy. What am I doing? And I think I maybe had one person my entire time say, oh, like, you shouldn't be doing this, you're unqualified. Almost everyone was like, this is great that we're seeing you get in there. We need to see more young people in here. Your guys' futures are what are at stake the most. So I think that's just where I'll kind of leave it at that, if anyone has any questions.
Thank you, John. I think you highlighted a lot of interesting points. And Ulster County is a blue county, and a lot of the politics are internal.
Saugerties is a little unique in that aspect, that we were red and purplish.
Yeah.
So my year getting elected, I forgot to mention that was the first time a Democrat had been on our board in 10 years. And that was the first time, I think, in 20 years that there hadn't been a registered Republican.
Wow.
Was that I won it.
How do you feel? Because I know that we had talked about, the way that we had met, I mentioned earlier, was the George Floyd protests and stuff. How do you feel? What do you feel that, because we already talked about John Carlos, and we talked about the notion to build an infrastructure for folks of color running. How do you feel county Democratic parties and progressive organizations can be allies to folks of color running in rural areas?
Probably just, when they come forward, giving them the space that they need and giving them the support that they need. I feel like, and honestly, it's going out there and purposely recruiting to do it. Because I think there might be, if I had the perception that this was scary and it was tough, I can imagine a person of color in a town like Saugerties will think it's even a lot harder, because we are a very white town, and I'm sure much of rural upstate is, kind of has a demographic similar to that. And I think it falls on the county party to go out there and do the work and do the recruiting and bring them in and give them the support, and not try and make them a cookie cutter or try to change them in a way, but to let them be who they are. And like even in my case, or John Carlos, don't tell us to change our appearance. That's part of who we are. That's part of our identity. And I think that's probably the biggest part, is trying to break down that the misperception that they maybe aren't, that they can't win. Anyone can win in any of these rural districts if you put the work into it. And if you just get out there and you're true to yourself, and that if you listen to the people and what they want, that's ultimately what most people are looking for, I find.
Great.
But that also is, maybe different, because I always like to draw back on this one experience on my first day on Teach Out's campaign, of how we still do deal with racism up in upstate. and that it was, I had a girlfriend at the time, Puerto Rican, and we were both knocking in the same neighborhood. I come back to the car that we had taken over together, and I'm like, oh, how did your first day go? Mine went great. I got a free soda. They gave me one for you. And she was like, it kind of sucked halfway through because I got one door where I was told to go kill myself. And, you Democrat, like she got like this crazy person just yelling at her and tearing into her. And most likely that was because she was a small Puerto Rican woman. Well, if I was at that door, it probably would have been entirely different. So and I think it's making sure that the party's there to support them through those incidents and to call it out on that. I think a perfect example is, how Paolo had said, how we kind of bonded over the George Floyd protests and the civil unrest that we saw. And, something that stuck out to me was disappointing at how many elected officials actually weren't stepping out or weren't standing up, or they felt it was a little risky. I remember the first Saturday after George Floyd's murder that I was down in New Paltz, a bunch of us from the Ulster County Young Democrats had gone down there, and it was very centralized where it was. And I saw one or two other elected officials, one being a village board member who had actually helped organize that in New Paltz, myself, and I can't remember who the other. But then I remember going, afterwards going over to a friend's house, and one of their local legislators was having a little lunch picnic out on her back porch while this was all going on. And to me, I'm sitting here like, you say you're for this stuff, you say you're supportive of it, but when you're being called on and people notice when you're not out there. And in my mind, if a town councilman from the town of Sardis is coming down to New Paltz, to me, it didn't make sense why you weren't out there, because it just, when you think about demographic wise, New Paltz, it's pretty safe as a Democrat. For me, I know I took flack. I helped lead daily protests here in Sardis, and I did take some heat on it. But at the end of the day, I think people care more about standing for what you believe in on that. And I think that the organization of the party has to make sure that we're out there and we're calling out people who aren't doing that.
For sure. I'd like to put an example out there. My county Democratic Party in Chemung County has its own issues with racial discourse and stuff. And the point that they tried to literally expel all of the folks of color who were on the county Democratic Party for supporting a woman of color that wasn't the Democratic candidate running for city constable in Elmira. I had to duke it out with, this woman who was a Republican, switched parties, ran in a district that Hillary Clinton won, talked her way into becoming the Democratic county legislature minority leader, refused to condemn the murder of George Floyd until we got involved and asked her to, make sure that she actually said something about it. These people engage in racial profiling and these things, but, I want to actually talk about, thank you, John, by the way. I want to jump into, and then Rin's going after me, so I'm sorry we're making you wait, Rin, I apologize. How's everyone feeling? From who I can see, it's a Monday. I feel everyone. I wanted to share my screen, and I wanted to show you guys this little presentation I put together to make sure that we can kind of have like a not an ideological, but kind of like a better understanding of why it's necessary for young folks to run for office, right? So I wanted to share this screen, and I'm sorry. I think who organized this meeting, because I just need to enable share screen if that's possible to make sure that I can share this presentation.
Hi, are you there?
Yeah, you can go ahead and do it now. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, Kai.
No problems.
Okay, here we go. All right, so I had shared a few folks on this. This is my grand scheme of taking over Shenango County. In the long term. In the short term, it's really a good way to kind of just talk about running for local office if you're a young person or a person that's run for office in the first time. Little background on me. My name is Paolo Cremidis. I was the Rural Caucus Chair for the New York State Young Democrats. We helped organize 33 chapters across upstate. Right now, I stepped down for that because my day job had become really, really busy. For work, I work in the office of Mayor Bill de Blasio. Sometimes I work on COVID test and trace things. Sometimes I work on upstate, downstate relationships. Sometimes I work on housing policy. I have a large hat. But my main passion is working in rural organizing and rural elections and kind of helping break down barriers for folks to run for office, right? So people talk about a who, what, where, why, and how. I have a where, why, how, who, and who. That shows how we can actually contest these elections and really the kind of headspace that we're in, right? And let me put it to you this way, guys. The places that we sit in, the Southern Tier and other parts of the country, there are places like, rural Minnesota and upstate New York, nationally speaking, are probably some of the last few places in this country where people do cross ballots, right? Where you will have people who vote Republican for president and will have a Democratic state senator or a Democratic congressman, right? Or sometimes even a Democratic town council person or a Democratic town supervisor or county executive, right? We need to be able to kind of utilize for municipal elections in 2021, right? And we need to be able to do that by strategically investing in town council races in places like Shenango County specifically, because it gives us the ability to generate a good bench, as well as creating a good recognition of Shenango County, not just only in the state, but maybe nationally as a county to show as an example of where the party can invest in rural America, right? We have to convince both parties that Democrats can win here and that progressive folks can win here, because right now, the arguments that we have about rural counties like Shenango County is that, number one, and this is something I was told about specifically with Shenango County, there's not enough young people to do anything to start youth groups. Number two, it's too red to be able to run as a Democrat that may not be able to win an election there, right? So that's the where. And that's why Shenango County is an important county to be able to invest in, because it really is an example of where the party can and should invest in rural areas, right? The why, as it stands for the rest of the country and the rest of rural America in face value, it may not really look like upstate New York has outperformed Democratic voting performance across rural areas, but we have, right? Because we're not South Carolina. We're not rural Southeastern Ohio. We're not Alabama, right? We're not all of these places that, used to be able to elect Democrats down ballot, but don't anymore because of partisanship, right? We still live in a region where people do cross ballot and where rural districts, and the Brindisi race is a good example, the elections are decided by close margins, and these are actual localized races. They're not races that are decided by national politics a lot of the time, right? And that kind of points into places like Shenango becoming a national example for the Democratic Party to win in rural America, right? Shenango County is an elastic county, and that's seen in how many people will vote across the ballot to make sure that, there's a level of democracy. And there's a whole debate about why people are doing that in certain parts of the country and other parts not. I'd rather not get into it because there's a lot of data, and we can't sit here for like 2 hours. That's the why and why we should be able to run, right? How, right? The question that I'm going to ask later is, does the county party have access to van, and will it give it access to folks who are running for local office, right? By using a technologically advanced approach, combining optimized canvassing lists from Voter Action Network, as well as doing voter registration, we can project a good strategy to win these elections, because you can actually do things like making sure that you have a win number and use that win number that you can generate, online, using tools that are already existing for people to run for local office to generate canvassing lists or phone banking lists, to make sure that you can actually know how many people you're supposed to talk to and how to build your universe to make sure that people you're talking to are the people who are going to go out and vote, right? Places like Shenango County have like high turnout, right? They have a high turnout for presidential elections, right? But that turnout drops when it comes to like local elections in 2021 and 2023 and stuff like that, right? And how do we change that, right? We change that by making sure that we can target a list of not just talking to folks who agree with us and who are Democrats, but also creating a persuasion list to make sure that we talk to independents. And this is a controversial opinion that I have among the consulting class, is that, people do vote for Donald Trump this year, right? And that might seem intimidating, but some of these people who voted for Donald Trump this year might not even know who their councilman is, right? They might not know that there are issues happening at the local level that we can inform them on, right? And that targeting folks like that might be a thing where we can actually turn out voters, right? And that's actually worked in the past. We are able to create a combined persuasion and base get out the vote campaign that can build a better coalition for local Democratic candidates to keep them in power. Not only keep them in power, but grow, right? Because I'm going to be honest with y'all. I know some of y'all want to run for local office. Yeah, look at yourself as a councilman now, and you could be an assembly person in the future, or a state senator or even a person who runs for Congress, right? There are so many benefits here from being able to run for office locally in a rural upstate county for us that folks do not see, right? I usually work in New York City, and watching the kids down there try and wait to run for local office, right? There's a level of modicum of jealousy, because for us, somebody like John or Eric or Giancarlo can run to become a local elected official, and there's no wait, right? There's an ability for them to win. And honestly, for them, it's easier to move forward than it is for somebody running in, let's say, Queens, right? Or Brooklyn. And I think AOC shows us all that it's very difficult to take on an incumbent, but it can be done, right? So the who, right? And this is the part that I really like to make sure that I can kind of spend some time on, right? There is this binary that exists within Democratic parties that show this idea that we need to be able to invest in candidates that can win, right? In candidates that have experience, right? We cannot rely on that, because the political class and the culture in a lot of rural counties, that doesn't exist for young people or people of color or progressive people. We need to be able to kind of change the culture, right? We have to have an open mind to recruit folks whose experience may not be electoral, but can learn and build a genuine brand to ensure that we have a real conversation around the notion of who runs for office, right? Let's change the conversation. Let's not just have a conversation where someone says, I'm going to run for city council or I'm going to run for town board. And we turn it into a conversation about, I am running for town board and you've never seen someone like me run for town board before. And let me tell you why that matters and why that's important and why I should earn your vote because of that, right? And Republicans do this, right? Republicans, I'll give you an example. Tommy Tuberville, right, in Alabama, just defeated Doug Jones for Senate, right? He didn't finish college. He's a football coach, right? He's not somebody that came, from the political class. He's not a lawyer, right? And, there's a whole other thing to talk about, and this is something where I asked folks, and I brought this up at a county Democratic Party, the fighting between moderates and progressives is something that does not exist to include our communities, right? Because sometimes the progressive candidates that are being told not to run by moderates are the kind of candidates that can win in these elections, because they can provide a genuine message and can provide an argument as to why there's somebody needed to vote for, right? So while I understand that there is a national debate going on about moderates and progressives, this is not something that should be a fight for us down ballot, because it is a problem for us to be able to already recruit candidates in these areas because we're not opening up the pool, right? So why add on this layer of conflict that doesn't need to exist, right? Right? We need elected officials that are committed to social and economic development, right? Social justice and economic justice in a way that kind of includes everyone, right? And we need to kind of build this notion of I like to call coalition of the 21st century, right? It's created upon the heels of what we used to be and what we can be as a party, right? It used to be that in Shenango County, we could have local Democratic elected officials. The partisanship didn't lower down to that level. It used to be that, we were able to elect Democrats in redder counties because those, we actually went out there and talked to these folks. Unlike the National Party now that's saying that our communities don't matter. There is a very strong trend in the Democratic Party, and I hate to say this, but it's true. But as a person of color, a lot of people want to erase our existence, right? They don't want people of color to exist in anywhere but places like New York City or places like, LA and stuff like that. But we do. And we have to be able to kind of make sure that these white affluent liberals who talk about our communities as if they know them, that we can meet up, we can meet that kind of political movement with an actual message, right? And that message is we can actually come out and advocate for our communities because we are from those communities. And we were from these communities before the Democratic Party even found out that people of color exist in some of these places, right? So when we talk about running for office, right, it's, ask yourselves not to think of folks having experience as something that you learn through spreadsheets, but something you learn through handshakes, right? When we think of candidates running for office, we need to put it into perspective that we should be asking folks to run for office, not the idea that we're just going to have to generate a lawyer or some sort of somebody who has a master's degree to be able to run, right? Folks who are involved in the community, not just in the concept of somebody who can, sign off an expense report or work in a corporate board or, sometimes even own a small business. A barber can have a better shot at winning a town council seat than a lawyer because they, people trust them. with cutting their hair, right? A grocery store clerk, right, understands number better than somebody who signs off on expense reports, because there's somebody who talks to every person in that town because we like to eat. I like to eat. I don't know about anyone else here, but I love to eat, right? And so those people, working class people who are never asked to run for office, never given the opportunity to kind of show their experience in a way that we can kind of make sure that that happens, those are the folks that we need to run for office. My message is to all the folks here who are interested in running, there are resources here for you to be able to work with us. We will work with you to generate win numbers. We will work with you to generate field plans. We will work with you to make sure that your victory is a convincing victory. And we can make sure that we can start generating a message that says no more. No more are our counties going to be left behind by a Democratic Party that thinks we don't even exist in these communities, right? We need to be visible. As folks who are people of color, young, working class women, LGBTQ plus folks and stuff, and I know that there's like a large representation of that here. We need to be visible, and we need to show, every time somebody puts down our community, we need to be able to show them, well, I'm a councilman there, or I'm a councilwoman there, or I'm a council person there, right? And I can tell you different. And yeah, it's going to be difficult, but we can actually make things happen. We must, be able to use this to reclaim the values of our party, being a party of working class people, and that includes us giving roles of leadership and positions to lead our conversation. Often, young people in rural communities, especially within the context of the Democratic Party, are being told, well, go get signatures, go do petition drops and stuff. We're never being given the ability to fight, right? I learned that pretty well when I'll share this story. There had been a woman who ran for Congress in the Southern Tier, right? We didn't think she was the best candidate. She had run through probably maybe 10 campaign managers in the cycle. And she did things like, she did some pretty gross things. Like she would try and go to Black Lives Matter rallies and take the microphone to kind of just tie her campaign as a Democrat to the Black Lives Matter movement, right? At one point, she had mentioned the idea of making Black Lives Matter unnecessary in the context of saying that it would be better if it didn't exist because that would mean we have a better progressive society, right? And this was a college-educated professor that had been at Cornell University that, for all accounts and purposes, should be somebody that understands the notions of progressive policies, right? Because they come from this perspective of liberalism that exists on a college campus, right? But this person couldn't even be brought to condemn, or even think about, banning Confederate flags on federal property, right? She had all these blind spots, right? And people were, we were being told, yeah, she's running again and she's going to win. She lost 67-35. She was the worst Democratic candidate in New York's 23rd congressional history. She refused to take advice from young people. I had her supporters, every time I mentioned something about her and her race, why am I being so aggressive? Why am I being so angry? I'm not a party player. I'm not a party leader. The point is that we're not here, and I'm sorry for all the older folks on here. I mean, you're all young at heart. There is a notion here that we need to talk about in that sometimes the county Democratic parties don't know the best thing, right? And sometimes they can't generate the candidates that we need because sometimes they generate candidates that only appeal to them. And their values, while they may have good thoughts and good ideas, that some of these county parties are worse than evangelical Christians. They won't change. And, looking at a place like Elmira, where 2,000 people march for Black Lives Matter, right? Looking at that and seeing that the people in power put in by my county Democratic Party weren't willing to talk about these things. The county parties can change and progressive organizations can change, or we will keep losing. Because the way to kind of go forward is to run genuine candidates that can actually, translate their message into something that people can relate to, right? And in many parts of upstate New York, the Republicans do this really well, right? You think the Republicans are asking people to run for office based on experience? No, right? And that's why a place like called Hammondsport, right, which is like a huge wine little town, right? They have a lot of wineries. It should be a place where progressive, where like the suburban style Democratic wine moms should be able to lead the town, right? Their mayor is a Republican janitor, right? It's somebody that was asked to run for office, right? the first Black county executive in New York State is my home county executive, Republican Chris Moss. Our party wants to stand, and progressive movements want to stand for progressivism and an ability to move forward. Then we need to put our, if we want to do that, we need to put our money where our mouth is, right? We need to be able to make sure that folks of color and young people and anybody can run for office, whether it's in Shenango County or Brooklyn, right? And so we're here to make sure that we tear down this barrier of experience, because experience is something that we learn. It's not a barrier to stop folks from participating, right? And I share some resources here that folks, Deborah and Kamari, I'm sorry, have been shared on this presentation, and I'm just going to plug in my information here too, to make sure that we can actually have these conversations. And I want to be a mentor. I don't have as much free time, and I'm trying to do this across upstate New York, but I want to make sure that we can actually have a conversation to encourage young people to run for office, right? And be there for them, right? And that's why, to segue here, thank you, Rin, for waiting so long. This is my friend Rin Reed. He's a partner in crime of mine. We talk a lot about the structural needs to be able to kind of change things for rural progressive folks and stuff. And she works for the Working Families Party. So if you don't mind speaking for a few minutes.
Yeah, I will be super brief. There's not much I can say that has not been covered. What an incredible slate of people who have run for office. Like, it's so inspiring to know that people ignored the call of the Democratic Party, who said, you need all this money to run, and did it anyway. And that is those are the candidates the Working Families Party wants to focus on and give supports to. So I'm just going to put some of my contact information in the chat. And some links. I know these are already linked. One of these is a Twitter account for the Run for Something representative for the East Coast. The one thing I will say is the Working Families Party is aligned, so you do have to apply for endorsement. You can do that on our website. And once you are endorsed, we will give you the resources we can, whether it's trainings, buying digital ads, or just walking you through some of the process and being a consultant. You do not have to pay us. It's a very nice addition to your campaign. We will be that person or that group that pushes you over the finish line. But Run for Something actually does do a lot more candidate support. You apply, especially for people under the age of 40. So those are just some tools. I could spiel about Upstate and Authentic Voices and how, the progressive and moderate fight is not a real one. But you've heard all of that. So I just want to give those resources, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions about running, or just want to connect with me and kind of tell me about yourself and help me plug you into our local chapters. But thanks so much for your time, guys.
Great. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, I think we should open up, half the panel's still here, or 2/3 of the panel's still here. Anybody have any questions?
I do have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
So my name's Deandra Sangetti Daniels, and I live in Otsego County. My question is kind of like a little broader in the sense, like, what is like Young Democrats and like the Democratic Party doing to like offset, to one, encourage people of color, specifically women of color, like make up for the difference in like income. So like a lot of the times, like finances and like working is a huge barrier for people to run, because you either have to quit your job or cut back on it. So I'm curious in like what kind of like ways have they been trying to like address that issue?
Sorry.
I can answer that question on what we did here in Dutchess County.
Yeah, go ahead.
So specifically with me, I did not have to cut back on my work. Social media was really a really big platform for me. In order to, all I had to do was write a couple sentences. If I had a video or, a message of where I was going to be at, it was literally a click away. And so for the young people that I'm mentoring here in Dutchess County to run, I'm telling them to do the exact same thing, where they don't necessarily have to quit their jobs. Running for office is not as hard as people make it seem. Some people in committees will tell you, oh yeah, you definitely got to quit your job, or you have to cut back on your job. You don't have to do that. You don't have to work hard. You just got to work smart. And the way that I did that was using the platforms, like using Facebook, using Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok, and using these platforms and figuring out what the algorithm was to reach the biggest amount of people that I could. So on this side of things in Dutchess County, social media was the biggest platform that I used. It was the cheapest platform because it was free, and I did not have to cut back on my work.
Yeah, I'm hearing some like, and I get that, but I think more for me, like when I'm thinking down ballot, although like common council and like smaller local government is probably that would work for, but I'm thinking like you guys were talking about like Anthony Brindisi and like Claudia Tenney, that kind of race and those kind of candidates where it's like the Democratic Party is like consistently losing, unfortunately. How are like, have there been any efforts to try to like encourage women of color or people of color,
Yeah.
young people, like grassrooting, like to offset like money loss or anything like that?
So I think that like that's an interesting concept, right? And you know, when it comes to like local offices and stuff like that, it's you know, I'm going to be honest with you, like the efforts that are happening are the organizations that are listed in that document, right? And being able to kind of build a concept. I'm going to be honest with you, right? Like the Democratic Party doesn't really have a dynamic where they're doing the conversations that we're having right now, right? Everyone here who's been an elected official kind of ran by building on their own infrastructure, right? And I'm, you know, us being able to kind of sit here and being able to assist you, you know, that's the biggest thing that we can do. And it's not a simple concept, but it's not as difficult as people think, because running for office, yeah, it is something that does take time, but you know, with a good field plan and with a good strategy and with us being able to advise you and, you know, by applying for the working families line and stuff, you're not going to have to cut down on your job or something. Cause we're talking about elections where, you know, they're decided by 800 people or, you know, 200 people in some points. Right. And these are things that can be elected locally. Now on the national level with races like Brindisi versus Claudia Tenney and stuff, I will say this, right? And this is something that I think might be a larger problem with like the Democratic Party in rural areas and like looking at the county Democratic parties and stuff like that. You know, I have had experience in some parts of that district where, you know, folks are so stuck in their ways that they're going to wait till the last moment for things to happen, right? And then they wonder why they lose, right? They wonder why launch campuses in September, right? When the election's in November, right? Why wait until the last moment to be able to kind of do a fundraiser, right? Why create a situation where, you know, experience overcomes instinct, right? And so the way to offset that is we need to be able to be in the positions of power to tell people not to do that. And people are not going to always listen to us, right? But, you know, you as a council person, you might be able to tell the Brindisi staff or something like that. And you're in Otsego County? Correct. So Delgado, right? So you might be able to tell them like, this is not the conversations that we need to have, right? And the conversations need to be able to work in a specific way to help people, right? And the problem is that the Democratic Party right now is so caught up in this debate between liberal and you know, progressive and moderate that we're not kind of creating an overarching message for our communities where we need to win, right? But this is how we do it. And there's not going to be a person there from the New York State Democratic Committee doing this sort of conversation, right? But we will be. I'll be here, right? Rin will be there. I think, you know, hopefully John and Giancarlo and Ben and Eric Ball, who I think unfortunately had to leave, will be able to kind of advise folks and make sure that we can actually generate a bench. Because I'll tell you something, I'm tired. I think a lot of people are tired of like this crap where like, you know, I personally, there's a dynamic here that doesn't really make sense, and it's very erasing, right? There's an ability to deal with racism within the party, and that ability is actually dealing with it. And unless we actually are able to take these positions of powers and show a lot of these affluent white liberals that have a lot of power in the party that, you know, want to tell people like Brindisi to be moderate, right? Your district doesn't let you win elections, right? Because it's too conservative, right? We're not going to be able to kind of change that conversation, right? And policies that are progressive, like, you know, reforming police, single payer healthcare and things. So these are things that are, you know, popular in swing districts and stuff. But we can't just go there and say, you know, well, I'm a moderate, therefore we need to do this and this, you know, or I'm a progressive, defund the police or whatever. It takes communication, right? And people, unfortunately, you know, people overall, regardless of who you are, you will be more of a, you know, folks will be more understanding of a dynamic, emotional message that communicates what's happening versus data. You know what I mean? And that's what we're here to make sure we can help it. Does that answer your question kind of?
A little. It was more like geared like me trying to be a little bit more sensitively saying like how are we gonna like compensate Black women for their time and their energy?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. So there are like I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm sorry for my insensitivity.
No.
So there are PACs out there to help women of color run, right? And there are PACs out there that will assist folks in being able to run for office, right? Like if you're a mom, there's a PAC out there called Vote Mama, where the person who leads it was a woman who ran for Congress in Long Island, and they actually were able to kind of get the what's it called, the Elections Commission, Federal Elections Commission, to allow people to expend childcare as something they could use donations for and stuff like that. There are ways for folks to be able to fundraise and create a conversation about fundraising that's easier than people think, right? And when we're talking about time and running for office, you know, this is the sort of thing that I think is dynamic and needs to be able to be talked about now, right? It used to be that these offices in upstate New York, I'll use an example, like Olean, right? It was a city in Cattaraugus County, right? The only reason they have a Republican mayor is because the Republican mayor has 2 pensions as a former cop, and the salary is too low for a person to raise a family on as a full-time mayor. You know what I mean? So we need to be able to start changing the dynamics about compensation and stuff. We need to start, you know, I would say, like, you know, some of these towns and stuff, we don't need city managers. We need a strong mayor system. We need to be able to make sure that working class people have the power. Right? My hometown of Elmira, you know, they keep raising the taxes 32% every year, but cutting off, you know, essential workers and stuff like that because they just have a city manager that doesn't really know what they're doing. And folks there aren't being empowered to do anything but, you know, keep the status quo going, right? And dismantling part of this political machine is talking about compensation, right? And that's a good point, right? Compensating women of color and stuff, we need to be able to kind of make sure that we prioritize them. And, you know, you have my pledge, and I think a lot of the pledge of the folks who want to do this work in 2021 to make sure that women of color, you know, are emboldened and empowered to be able to run for office, and that we will give you the space to be able to take the attention, because we want rural America and upstate New York not to be defined as white, but as a place where diverse voices can win. And we'll make sure that you get the resources available to be able to run and stuff. I'll even help you make a logo. And do you want to run?
Yeah, I would love to be the mayor of Oneonta, and that's kind of like my question derived from, but there's like $11,000 or something like that, 12,000.
Yeah.
Because we do have city manager type makeup. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, it would be, and unfortunately I work, you know, Monday through Friday business hours. So I would have to cut back on work, and I would have to consider like finding other things like that. And I know running might not take a lot of time, but like overall the job commitment in itself and making sure you can allocate enough of your time to the citizens and you're actually out there doing the work. If you work a morning job and you're trying to get business done, you know, you can't really be calling into City Hall at like 6 p.m. when you're out of work. Yeah. So those are the kind of things like I think about. And too, like when we think about young people, like they have a lot of debt, like student loans and stuff like that. So to make sure that everyone is truly able to run and it's a fair thing, like we can't just have retirees running. That's why we have a bunch of like middle-aged white men running our towns, because they can afford to, because they're retired and they have free time and they have their pensions and all that kind of things. Yeah. So like that's kind of where my mindset's at, and making sure that we're thinking outside of the box to get people into office is going to take a lot more than like a social media platform.
For sure. And that's where the support comes in, to be able to kind of, you know, the other part of like running for office, you know, when I was caucus chair and stuff, I had a hard time setting boundaries, right? And I would let, you know, things that people would say and do would set me off. Like I would hear some people, and I'm sorry for cursing, there's some bullshit situations, I'm sorry for cursing again, where, you know, people on our board didn't think that there were elections next year in upstate New York. So when, you know, when people would talk about elections in 2021, people thought we were talking about the New York City Council, right? And, you know, sometimes it's a good idea to be able to set boundaries for yourself, and to be able to kind of set boundaries for yourself in a way that's dynamic. And, you know, Deandra, if you're going to be a mayor, you're not, you know, you're the mayor. That doesn't mean there aren't council members, right? And that there aren't districts where these folks actually need to be invested in, right? You can't carry the mountain yourself, right? And setting up a good conversation there, that's another conversation starter for people to run for office, right? Say you become the mayor, right? And you get elected. That's awesome, right? And we see your face in the nation or something like that. You know, this young woman of color is changing the dynamics in upstate New York, right? Why isn't the Democratic Party listening to her and stuff? And you have all these like older council members that send everyone to talk to you, right? And they just want to throw problems at you, right? The best way to kind of fight that is to say, you know, we have a council, we have you know, the people that are sending you to me are council members. You know, you voted for them. They're not able to deliver for you. I think that's part of the equation that needs to change. You know what I mean? And it's a lot of emotional work, but there is this, you know, we're creating it's not something that's permanent, and it's not something that you know, I can't promise that everything will go right, but we do have an emotional support network set up. Trust me, I've talked to people here about all of these issues and stuff a lot of times. We do have a network, and it's not an official network. It's not like a DNC Democratic Party network. It's us, and it's us being genuine and being real, and being able to kind of actually have these conversations, and, you know, make sure that like the resources are available for folks to run for office and stuff. And that's what we're trying to do. Just make sure that we can trickle resources down to this level. Go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
Well, I just wanted to add in there because I know I think a big aspect of what you're thinking of is like if you be able to do the actual work during the day, because like, I actually have a 9 to 5 myself. And something I found that I was actually a little bit surprised at, but, you know, it was a pleasant surprise, is that your employer might actually be very receptive to, you know, giving you that time that you need. You know, I actually ended up leaving work early today, and, you know, where I work, you know, I don't know where you work. I don't know if it's, you know, if they would have a similar attitude, but I think you'd be surprised that like, that how willing they will be to like kind of modify around with that. And I think part of that stems from I think employers like the idea if they have employees, you know, winning elections and being up there, you know, I think it, you know, gives them a nice little spot that, you know, brag about possibly. But also I think it's just, you know, especially when they see someone young, they want to see you succeed. And in their mind, it's showing ambition. And I think, you know, might not be as much of an issue. And in Oneonta's specific case, I don't know how much you said you guys had like a city manager on top of a mayor. So if that's the case, it might not be as much 9 to 5 work. And like Paolo was saying, you're going to be the mayor. If you need to set a meeting at 6 o'clock, 6:30, you know, you set that meeting at that. You know, most of my meetings, they're all after 6. Earliest I think I have is at 5:30, because I was like, guys, this is what works for me. And they were like, because I think that's part of when you get into these positions, like it's a position with weight to it and with some power. So just, I think you don't have to be afraid to, you know, use that if you were like, say, the mayor. Because I've had the same thought where our supervisor makes only $38,000 a year, and he frankly has it because he owns a restaurant, has a bunch of rental property. And I've had some people be like, oh, would you look at that at some point? And I've just flat out and told them no, because if I wanted to do it, I'd want to give it a full time. And Sardi's, we don't have a city manager set up, so the supervisor is the head. We're weird because we also have a village within the town, so we're one of those fun ones that hopefully one day we will finally merge those, so we're not 2 forms of government in one town. And I can stop telling people, oh, that's a village issue, not a town issue, because I don't know if it's the same for out with Ben, but our village board is not as responsive or like as quick as the town board. So a lot of people will end up coming to us. But yeah, it's definitely, I think that is a concern. I think the way of addressing that really is just, I think, raising that issue. You know, it hasn't been an issue before. So, you know, get out there and be like, hey, like, you want someone like me in this position? We need to make it equitable so that we can do that. And so that we don't have all these retired old white men and sometimes maybe an old retired white woman with these pensions that are able to, oh, I can do it. This is just a hobby for me. When really you should have someone in there who they're giving it their full time. And I think that's gonna, you know, that takes a lot of, that's good. That takes a lot of groundwork, and having it, you know, having people there to help. I know I can plug my information for everyone here so that they can have that if they ever want to reach out. I know on top of what I've done with my own campaigns, we've been doing a lot of work building out like a Young Democrats network that was inactive essentially in Ulster. So I could always plug you in with us, have any of you guys want to sit in. Because I know, like he was touching a little bit on the fundraising. We are actually basically we've taken the Young Dems and we're using that as a fundraising apparatus to help out our, young people run. A lot of us that we're recruiting, one works at Adams, the other, they don't have these big fancy jobs and they have 9-to-5s. But if you put the resources there, that they'd be a great representative for people. And people know that. And we just have to, and it's going to be cliche, but I think it's just a matter of getting down there, doing the work and spreading that message out there. Because, people, they want to hear from us. An example I use a lot is during my legislative run, I knocked on the door, didn't know the guy was a Trump supporter. And I was like, all right. So we were talking. By the end of the time we were talking, he was still, he still liked Trump, but then he was going to vote for me and Dave Clegg for district attorney, who was like he's the most progressive district attorney we've had in Ulster County.
Upstate New York.
Yeah. So like, it's a great example of how it's just getting out there and talking to people. And like I said, in your case, maybe start, talking to the mayor a little bit, find out what it takes. A friend of mine who's looking to run for a village here in Sargis, he was like, all right, I want to look into it. So we sat down, we met with the supervisor yesterday. He met with the mayor after that, and he just started learning and finding out what it was. Because you might have this perception that it takes a lot of this time, but it may be something that you can work around your schedule. And it's just have to get in there and find out.
Yeah. And Deandra, we're here. I think I just shot you my email. I would love to work with you. I think there's a lot.
Appreciate your guys' time.
Yeah, no worries. I think that there's like a lot of places for us to be able to work together on a lot of victories. And, one thing that I talked with Vin about is that we really want to put together like a slate of candidates across upstate New York that show that there's like a generational change happening. And that would be really attractive, for donors and stuff like that. And, does anybody else have any other questions? I guess not.
Matt was talking about running for office, but he seems to have left the group. So,
What's that? Oh, he left.
Matt Cooper, yeah.
Can you connect us?
I do want to run you.
Excuse me?
Could you connect us via email or something, Deborah?
Sure. Amanda Mills is here too. She also is planning to run for office. I don't know if she has any questions though.
No, I don't have any, but I'll send my email into the chat here.
Okay, she's going to put her email in the chat.
Is this Shenango for Shenango County or Otsego?
Yeah.
Shenango.
Great. Yeah. I please just I think I put my email in here. We're available. We can assist folks in anything. And the biggest thing that we want to do is make sure that we have like a visible slate and that we actually have some of these town council races covered and stuff. And depending on what happens, it's looking like a lot of, a few towns in Shenango County that might have full Republican slates might have been won by Brindisi, right? And I don't know if that translates into local elections or anything like that, but maybe, a progressive candidate that can get the Working Families Party ballot, runs a smart campaign and is endorsed, hopefully by the incumbent Democratic congressman, that might be the shot there. And we might be able to kind of win a couple of those races. Thank you.
Okay.
For inviting me.
All right. Thank you for coming. This is great. I thank everybody that you brought with you as well. This is wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you.
If anybody here has any other groups, hi. If anybody here has any other groups that they would like us to speak at, we're speaking. Well, I'm, depending, I have to ask everyone here what their time commitment is, but I'll be speaking in Chautauqua County in a week, and then in Wayne County in another week, and I'm willing to speak at other groups as well to kind of make the same presentation and stuff. And we'll have like a detailed down, good data-driven approach about how to talk about your counties and what they look like and stuff. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kaimari, by the way, for hosting this and stuff.
No problem.
Yeah, great. Well, I guess that's it, right? Everyone have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Time to get some dinner.
Yeah, me too. Bye.
Okay, so Kai said to stay for a second.
Okay, who we got? Liz Simcoe. Okay, she's gone. No, she's still here. All right, so it's just us back.
It's just us. Oh, the feedback's terrible.
Yeah, that's why I turn one off.
That's loud.
There we go.
So,
Okay. So